I don't know whether you've actually seen a proper bullshit conversation yet at IQM, but it's like full on trying to have the most absurd conversation for X amount of time until somebody needs to tap out because they can't laugh that much anymore and they need to breathe.
I almost feel like one of the indicators of if our sprint meetings went well is if people laughed.
Like my objective is not to get the devs to do more work in the same amount of time or to do the same amount of work in less time. Not at all. I'm trying
Hmm.
to create more space to avoid stress, to avoid collisions when stuff inevitably goes wrong. I'm not trying to optimize productivity to get more done.
No,
I'm trying to optimize productivity to have more time. The biggest motivation sappers is having a huge backlog of great ideas, which you'd never get around to because then people don't end up adding to the pile.
hi, welcome back to one of our PVTs. These ones specifically to do on strategy because I am joined with Thibaut, who's the head of strategy. These are times for us to share and mainly for Thibaut to share with me more about strategy so I can have a better understanding as I've been helping out more in many of the domains that Thibaut works in. So if you wanted to share more on that and why we're having these conversations.
We had a quick chat before this to sort of recap the last three discussions we had and sort of where we were going. And so what I said was that a lot of the decisions that me and Stuart make in IQM are led consciously or unconsciously, explicitly or implicitly by these principles, this sort of plan, sort of vision, which I think, well, as part of my role, I spend a reasonable amount of time trying to structure and I'm doing that consciously, but Stuart also does that, and especially those sort of principles and the idea of this format to talk about this more in detail was in first instance, applied directly to you to have a place where these thought processes, the application of these principles, but then also the principles themselves are made more explicit and more easily accessible so that if somebody gets to the point in the organization where they need to step up and take more responsibility, that they have something that they can emulate in terms of applying some of those principles, etc. So, it's
Mhm.
talking about those higher level principles and priorities and the strategy, but also what that then looks like when we apply them on a day-to-day and an operational basis. And then for people in the team who maybe want to understand why certain decisions are made in a certain way. And so we can have this point of reference of first the status quo of, well, this is where we are now, and this is sort of the intention, and maybe that doesn't come across, or it does come across, or maybe we're contradicting ourselves in certain areas, but at least this is kind of where we are now. And then from there, we can have some of those discussions that we were starting to have of, well, what can we do to make these principles and make this strategy come more alive for the team and have everybody in the organization apply it directly within their domain. But I think before we are able to do that, we need to first understand sort of where we are now, because otherwise we might be going back and forth a bit.
Mhm. So in this specific discussion right now, are we wanting to talk more about what's happening right now at IQM? Because we've talked a lot about more about the strategy and that side. Are we wanting to talk more about where you feel it is right now?
Yeah, I think we can start there to sort of have a look at how the plan that we set out about 4 or 5 years ago, what that was, what were the priorities that we set, what were the decisions that we made, where has that brought us now, where are we now, are we still sort of on track, does that plan still make sense, and that kind of stuff.
What I understand from what you said before, it was that around 5 years ago, you had a discussion with Stuart, and he just said he was all in on the way you wanted to run a company and the way you wanted to work. And then you then were brought into IQM from there. What were those principles that you feel like he really latched onto?
It was more this sense of I don't want to say discontent, but like unease with the status quo of
Mhm.
what the world looks like in general. How do we organize ourselves as humans? And so rather than me saying, this is exactly what we're going to do, that I
Mhm.
was saying, well, I believe it can be done differently, and I want to try and create this space where we can try out some of those different ways of organizing ourselves. And I don't know yet what they're going to look like, but I think we can try. It was less in agreement with, it was more in common opposition to, if that makes sense, right? Which
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
human history we know is a good way to get people together. Yeah.
The common piece that I see is there is the want to change and the want to try out changes. And I would say that that isn't everyone and that isn't every business. And
True.
that is a commonality.
So interestingly, right, I came in with this lofty pitch and ideas of, well, I think we can do better, right? We can change the world and we can
Mhm.
make it a better place. And there were three people in that conversation, so it was me and Stuart, but Mark was there as well. And what Mark and Stuart did to test me to make sure that it would work is we had a bullshit conversation. And I don't know whether you've actually seen a proper bullshit conversation yet at IQM, but it's like full on trying to have the most absurd conversation for X amount of time until somebody needs to tap out because they can't laugh that much anymore and they need to breathe. But so, from the get-go, it was this mix of actually pretty serious, relatively philosophical, relatively high level, but relatively serious concepts and fun. And I think, you know, those two principles from the get-go of we can actually have serious and fun at the same time and they actually help each other rather than them having to be separated, whether between child and adult or whether between hobby and work or whatever. No, right? We can have
Mhm.
both. So I think if anything that, and yet since then we've had numerous discussions around if we need to make a decision between two things in the business, which one are we going to choose? So we have a number more of those principles that we are either explicitly or implicitly aligned on. But the initial building blocks were those, I would say.
Has there been any conversations since that with Stuart where he has outright been like, no, I'm not for those changes?
Stuart, when he sees that an idea has some level of merit, he will try and break it to make sure that he does. So anything that he's dedicating brain space to, even if it sounds like he's criticizing the idea a lot, is probably because he thinks it's worth spending brain space on. I mean, other than like technical decisions, which I don't know are not in my domain and whatever, and he just makes a snapshot
Mhm.
decision on, I don't think he's ever outright said no to anything, or I just didn't accept it, and we ended up having a discussion. I don't know, right? I can't. Would be
Mhm.
interesting to ask him, but yeah.
It is cool though, that kind of shows that how much of his commitment to that goal have continuing to try out new things, continuing to see how we can improve things. He's not holding on to any rigidity of the way things were or not wanting to try out things, which is great to have in a business partner.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think we relatively quickly found a dynamic that sort of works for both of us in terms of autonomy and communication and whatever. I mean, it didn't happen overnight, right? I mean, we've been doing this for 5 years
Mhm.
now, but yeah, when we set out 5 years ago, the goal was to create an environment because you have to remember that this started from a sort of side project of we wanted to create this educational
Mhm.
game, and so part of the idea was, well, we want to create a space in which we have the resources, time, money, people to be able to invest in those kind of projects and to be able to do fun stuff. If we wanted to build a video game, we would be able to. If we wanted to build an educational tool, we would be able to. If we wanted to go to a game jam, whatever, we would be able to. We would have those excess resources that we wanted to invest. And so, ironically, right? the first point of order was to massively professionalize the way that the business was ran so that we could actually determine where our resources were being spent and whether we had excess resources or not. And very quickly, the conclusion was, well, actually, at the moment, we're at a deficit of time, money, and people. And so what we need to do is we need to sort out the capitalist side, right? The success factor of, can we actually afford to do these fun things? And part of that had to do with business development and making sure that our business model was sustainable, making sure that we were spreading out the risk in terms of products, in terms of customers. And, a lot of effort has gone into that in order to make sure that we were making enough money to sustain ourselves and to hopefully build in some redundancy for the sort of key people in the organization, so that if we want to spend a week on something, Stuart doesn't get called out every 2 hours by a customer because he's the only one who can resolve an issue. And so the initial goal of increasing our revenue, increasing our team size in order to be able to achieve those things, I would say, we're a lot better off now than we were 5 years ago. But we've also taken a few significant hits along the way, especially with the two more senior developers that were working with us all the way at the start when I joined, who had a lot of product knowledge and who were able to actually take over a significant amount of Stuart's workload independently, at least on two of the products. Both left, one of them relatively quickly and the other one 2 years ago now. So, we had some setbacks and we're still having to build that up. Like we're nowhere close yet being able to take Stuart out of daily operations for any extended period of time without significant risk. And, until you joined, me taking an extended holiday only put more pressure on Stuart because he was the only other person who even had an idea of what was going on in my domain, right? And so if you put those two things together, they're very problematic. They're very high risk. And so ironically, a lot of the effort and a lot of the time that we've been spending over the last 5 years has been to run a business in a very traditional sense, but the objective hasn't changed. I'm looking for every little gap in the roadmap that I can see to be like, oh, can we put some fun in there? Can we put some breathing room in there? Can we make sure that we're still on track for that? And, the conversations that I'm going to have with the, let's call it release team or product team about how the roadmap looks, I'm not going to have that discussion with them about condensing the product roadmap to create more space so that we can sell more stuff and so that we can fill it up with more work for the dev team. No, I'm trying to create breathing room so that we can finally start benefiting from that space that we've created to do some of those things that we've talked about, 5 years ago. I think maybe that's the part of the business which, especially if you've not been with us for long, is probably not visible or probably not explicit, because the reality has been that we've created some time in the roadmap. We were going to use it for other stuff, for internal priorities. And then luckily, but, unexpectedly, more new business came in and more new business came in. And so knowing that would allow us to hire more resources, which would help us to build in that redundancy and of course scale, but, redundancy as well. That has then taken priority. And so if you look at the roadmap for the last 2 years and for the next at least year and a half, it doesn't look like this is what we're doing. It doesn't look like we're prioritizing fun and internal projects and investment and innovation, but that is still the aim.
I would disagree with that a little bit. Only I know we're still very much working in some ways harder than we want to be, or prioritizing things that don't align specifically with our overarching goal. But the fact that during all of this, we still have had a monthly game time where we spend more than 2 hours together during work hours, not doing work and just having fun and playing games together, whether that be D&D or like a Steam game or just a board games type, like online board games. On top of that, also having like diversity and inclusion meetings where we're like making sure to prioritize communication. Also having a every 6 months meet in person time where we meet in person for at least 2 days just to have fun. Like these are all things to me that do show that even in such stressful and high times, we are um, trying to prioritize fun. Or even in our sprint meetings. I don't know if it's explicit or not, but I almost feel like one of the indicators of if our sprint meetings went well is if people laughed, if people had fun. I often am like, oh, the team's not doing well, or the team probably needs more things because we didn't today, or
Yeah.
we didn't joke at all. Because I do think that we'd still use that as an important metric. So it might not be obviously what we're wanting it to be to that level of ease. But I do see it in the business.
Okay, well that's good to hear. That's reassuring. Yeah, I think, I would like to get it to a place where it doesn't add stress,
Yeah.
right? We can comfortably do it. And I don't have to look at the roadmap or look at the sprint and be like, is it worth Stewart going, ugh, when he sees there's a team building task? Not because he doesn't want to play games with us, but because he
Yeah.
knows that if he had those 3 or 4 hours more to work on
Yeah.
other stuff, he'd be less stressed. And there's a whole range of things that we haven't even touched in years, which are things that require dedicated capacity from the team for longer than 2 hours to be working on, like internal innovation, like interesting side projects that we want to work on, whether that's just for fun or it's because we want to develop a product or a project which sits in an industry that is more aligned with our values. We used to do what we called venture sprints, which was the whole team for a whole sprint is dedicated only to finding cool ideas to work on and then prototyping them and working on them and that kind of stuff. And that's completely disappeared because our roadmap has been so full for the last 2-3 years. But so there's a whole range of things that we had started putting in place, which have fallen back into the background, but which are the kind of things that I would like to comfortably be able to put into the roadmap again.
So it's sounding like the metric was fun and innovation, and that's still very important. But it sounds like the one that makes more sense for us to try to be measuring right now, at least, should be more stress.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking whether they are not the same thing, or whether they're not like different measures on the same spectrum or something.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely. Like I am trying to keep track of, is stress low enough to be able to put more fun in, kind of thing. So for me, the two are kind of linked. But yeah,
I agree. I often cannot have fun if I'm stressed, but I was thinking of having the priority be more on the stress because that also doesn't make it feel bad when we choose not to have fun. Because we're saying, hey, actually, like we're wanting to make things less stressful right now. So we are going to choose not to do this thing that is fun normally, but right now it's not fun because it would add more stress. So it's okay that we're choosing not to do it this sprint because we want to decrease stress.
so I agree with that as a principle, but my experience of the implementation of that is that then actually stress doesn't decrease. And other things that otherwise would have not been prioritized, but which aren't fun, get prioritized. So ultimately the workload is the same, but there are less fun elements in the workload. So, if we look at the snuggles and, in terms of, so snuggles are disruptions to our planned workload, either internal or external, mostly external. So anytime a customer reports a bug or an issue with a product, it comes in as a snuggle and then we prioritize it. It gets assigned to someone. And based on the prioritization, it gets worked on sooner or later. So there's a number of snuggles which are actually not a service level failure and who are sitting in the backlog of stuff that should get looked at some point. If I'm saying, well, we're not going to do a gaming session this month, what's most likely going to happen is that gap will get filled up by some of those lower priority snuggles, for instance. Not to
Mhm.
say that that's a bad thing necessarily, because we should be working on those snuggles and we should be looking at those. But ultimately, what we thought would reduce stress didn't, and actually the opposite, because now those laughs and social connection and other stuff that would have happened during that team building has been filled in by something that's not fun for the majority of the
Mhm.
team. So it's a delicate balance for me to sometimes be like, no, actually, I would rather that the team doesn't deliver certain things to our customers, and that we spend this time as a team to try and have fun together, even though everybody kind of in the back of their head is like, oh, I should be doing this thing. Because I'm not looking at the 1 week, 1 month picture. I'm looking at the 6 month, 1 year, 2 year picture. And I know how easy it is to cancel 3 or 4 of these in a row.
Mhm.
And then we have a whole different problem, because now we're not
Mhm.
just giving people a little bit more time back in their sprint. Now we're starting to see bigger frustration, disconnections in the team, and that kind of stuff. And so, these are the struggles that go on in my head when I'm thinking, okay, there's 3 devs moaning at me that there's too much in their sprint. What's going to give? I try very, very hard that not by default, it's always the fun stuff.
Yeah, that goes back to something you said in one of the previous conversations we had about how we can't really make improvements without feedback. And I think of how
Hmm.
in this kind of delicate balance of, am I decreasing stress or am I actually just decreasing connection?
Hmm.
Which in turn will add more stress. I think getting feedback and also having a team that can communicate very honestly is really important so that
Hmm.
we can know those things and be able to make those choices. And also using historical examples of when we have chosen not to, did it go well or did it not go well? And having that evidence would probably be helpful to know if it's the right choice or not. Because I can get in those types of nuanced decisions, it can feel like we have no clue if it's the right decision. Because it's just, could be the right, could be the wrong based on the situation.
Yeah, and I think, that will probably be part of that discussion that we started last week of, well, what are those KPIs of, are we sticking to our goals, principles, values, and that be a way for the team to evaluate or give feedback to me and Stuart. Because if I look at the KPIs that we've set out for the team of what we consider to be a constructive member of the team on those more human aspects, that's taken years and multiple iterations to get to a point where at least the IQM good, I think that's good. We're using it, it's concrete, people know what it means. I have lots of examples of good or bad on all 4 points. And so at the moment, if you ask me, well, based on what measure can you say that not doing team building for 4 or 5 months actually has decreased the team spirit or the productiveness or satisfaction or whatever? I don't have a metric to give you to say it was this before, it was that now, that's worse, we want to improve it. And for IQM good, we have qualitative measures which are subjective, but we have ways of saying, well, this has increased our trust, this has decreased our trust. Here are some very practical things that you do that we don't want to see, or here are some very practical things that you do that we do want to see. And I suspect as we start talking about these things, as we're doing now, we will start to develop a language, and we will start to develop more of a way to evaluate what does good look like, and when are
Mhm.
we slipping.
I think we do have, maybe they're not being used in this way, but I can see
Mm,
how through small edits they could be used in this way. But the team enjoyment is something that we do track. We
yeah.
track how much does someone enjoy their last sprint. They give it a rating between 1 and 5 every sprint. And the same with their enjoyment of a task. I'm not sure if how it's being used now would give us the perfect view, but we could look at during the sprints that include a gaming time, does that change anything? But that would maybe even would involve tracking that a bit more or explaining to the team that, hey, our enjoyment tracker is specifically to do with stress or having a stress tracker, maybe having a new one. I'm not sure. We can see how we already have those systems in place of that where we tell the team this is important, that we do try to track this. So it wouldn't be too hard for us to use it in this way.
I think the way that I've used traffic light and enjoyment, so traffic light is a 4-color system, green, yellow, amber, red, where we indicate how much we are looking forward to doing a certain task. And then enjoyment is the retrospective measure on the same scale on a specific task. And then we have the fun tracker, which is an overall indicator, 0 being absent, and then 1 to 5 being the actual rating, which is people's overall fun or enjoyment of that sprint, of that week of work. And the way I currently use it is I look at the overall data, and if there is anything that stands out to me, then I'm going to ask, why is that different? Whereas potentially what we could be doing with that data, which I think is what you're suggesting, is that we ask it specific questions, which is how does a team building task impact people's enjoyment? Does it have a spike during that week, up or down? Does it have some longer trailing effects? You know, do we see the overall average score being a bit higher for the next few sprints, or the opposite? And so I'm not using it that way, but we've got, you know, years of historic data, which we could relatively easily interrogate, because, you know, you would only have to run a report on when did we do team building activities, in what week does that fall, and then we look at all the team trackers and we map it to those sprint.
If we're not getting the right data on how does every individual find the team building for that specific sprint, because sometimes our enjoyment tracker, it's more to give a quick overview that one person gives feedback. But maybe for team building tasks, we have it so that it's more important for everyone to give honest feedback on how much they enjoyed it. Because we just say, oh, it's a green task, it's a team building task. But maybe for some people it isn't. And maybe it's because they have a more stressful sprint. And so maybe we just do a better job of making it more explicit that everyone has to individually track that.
I can guarantee you that nobody's going to put a red on a task that they have with me, right?
That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So, and obviously here we're asking the specific question of the team building task, which I think is a separate example. And we could have some kind of feedback form on the team building or on the sprint process or on that kind of stuff. And maybe we should be doing that. But there are more insidious things like that in that measure. And so I know it's an imperfect measure. And in principle, the way I currently use it is only to start a conversation. So I will go to someone and I will say, I've noticed that you've got a lot of orange in this work category. What's going on? Is there anything we can do to make it more fun? Is there anything we can do to get you less of those tasks, that kind of stuff? So I'll never take that information at face value. But yeah, I think we can probably improve them. We need to be wary of the administrative burden that we're putting on the team just to get a little bit more accurate information, you know, that kind of stuff. But yeah.
I'm thinking of less about the administrative burden of getting more exact data and more going back to one of the principles we were talking about at the beginning, where it seemed like a large importance for the company and also for us understanding where we're at or where we're going is people being honest. And so how do we make it easier for people to be honest with us?
Yep. I think the only way to do that is by showing people that being honest doesn't have a negative consequence, and you show that consistently over a long period of time.
Can I share ways that I've felt I have built that with you?
Sure.
Where I can be more honest. For me, it's come from seeing you live out those principles. I think it was like 4 or 5 months in, where I had said something in a meeting with everyone in one of the more casual meetings, where I said something that hurt you, and that you felt wasn't true and that you felt hurt by. And you very quickly after that meeting messaged me on the side saying, hey, do you mind if we talk? And then you brought it up in a very non-accusatory way. You brought it up in a very like a calm way where you just shared, hey, this is the issue that I had. This is the issue where I felt like what you said. I felt like it wasn't honest. And then shared also what solution you felt would be helpful for those situations. And that gave me time in a very low stress environment to share back and be like, okay, is this what you mean? And us just to have a more casual discussion. And so from that, I realized, oh, he does actually want me to give feedback because he's giving me feedback. And it's not a you're fired situation. It's a
Yeah, yeah.
very calm feedback of, hey, this hurt. I don't think this is who you are. I just want you to know so that we can improve this, which helped me feel more safe in being able to share myself.
Hmm. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. That will definitely be one way to sort of reinforce that. It's kind of dependent on me actually having something to say to everyone on the
Yeah,
team,
I
right?
think that's the only way. Yeah.
And everybody will deal with that very differently. Like we've got vastly different types of dealing with criticism or feedback in the team,
Hmm.
right? But I think that to circle back to what we set out to do 5 years ago and kind of what happened in the meantime and where we are now, I think that my hope is, and I keep saying this, right? I think that in the next year and a half, we should be at a place because we'll have rolled out 2 new product instances and we'll have basically half the team which has finished onboarding by then, right? Because
Hmm.
they've finished their roadmap item of onboarding, but actually getting productive in the role and fully
Of
getting
course.
operational within the team takes way longer. And so I'm hoping that both the reduction of workload and the increase of productivity of the team will get us to a place where we can start talking about these things. And so I think that specifically you and me in our domains and in our roles, we can now start thinking about and start scaffolding some of that stuff so that when we have that time, we know what we want to do with it and we know have hopefully prepared the team for
Hmm.
what's going to happen and that they, instead of looking at the roadmap and seeing gaps and thinking, oh, we'll just cram more work in that, they are looking forward to the kind of stuff that we will be doing with that kind of time and those gaps in there.
Hmm.
But that element of accountability that we talked about to say, these are our objectives. And if you feel like we're not achieving them, this is your way of telling us, which does not put you at risk of getting fired just because you have said so. And I think
Hmm.
that is also an element of building the trust of being able to be honest, being able to give feedback. Because if we as an organization put some of those mechanisms in place for maybe low stakes feedback, but which in a traditional corporate environment would actually be pretty high stakes, to have some of those small processes in place. And I think internal tensions, to be honest, are one of those as well.
Hmm.
Um, to see I'm able to do that. It does not have negative consequences on me. Actually, in fact, it has positive consequences, right? People are happy when I raise tensions and when I give feedback. That then also, I hope, extrapolates or ripples on to interpersonal feedback and more sensitive and emotional subjects potentially.
Giving that ownership and that autonomy to the team to understand what the principles are and to be able to apply them. Does that look like right now telling the team that our largest priority right now is to try to find those times for fun when looking ahead at the road? And so they can know that they also have the autonomy to say, oh, it looks like here we might have time for innovation. And that could lead to more conversations with you to be like, actually, yes, that's great. Let's try to work towards that. Or when we're having these discussions about, hey, it seems like our releases are dragging on a bit long and they keep getting longer and longer. When we have those conversations with the team, the devs don't go, oh, you're just wanting to cram my work
Yeah.
and make me more stressed.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, you're doing this because we're wanting to make more time for fun, not make time for more work.
Yeah. I think ultimately what we're trying to do is condense these already 4 hours of conversation, and there'll probably be a few more, right? Down
Mhm.
into a 1 or 2 minute thing that we can repeat and then we can easily make accessible to the team of saying this is what we're trying to achieve. And and I think I said it explicitly when I was talking about the roadmap stuff. I did say my objective is not to get the devs to do more work in the same amount of time or to do the same amount of work in less time. Not at all. I'm trying
Mhm.
to create more space. And initially, because we know in the medium term, let's say short to medium term, for me, like a year and a half is short term, but yeah, let's say medium term, the workload is slowly going to decrease. And we know that the productivity of the team is slowly going to increase because we just have a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of new people on the team. So I'm expecting to see more gaps in the roadmap from that happening. So I'm not super rushed to try and create space in the roadmap for fun, because I
Mm-hmm.
think that's going to happen naturally over the next year. My priority at the moment is to create space in the roadmap to avoid stress, to avoid collisions when stuff inevitably goes wrong, when disruptions happen. If I look at a block in the roadmap that has 4 weeks of development work nonstop, I don't know when something will go wrong that will mess that up, but I can tell you for sure it will, right? It
Mm-hmm.
might be week 1 or it might be week 6, but a customer is going to call up,
Yeah.
is going to have a big enough issue that means that everything gets pushed by week 2, 3, 4, 6.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the moment, the reason why I'm having these conversations to try and make our roadmap more manageable for the next 12 months is not because I want to cram more team building in there. It's
Mm-hmm.
because I want to make sure that we survive mentally, physically, until we're hopefully at the time where we have more time in the roadmap, just naturally by those project phases being rounded off and by everybody coming on board and up to speed. And I think that is very vivid in my mind, but
Mm-hmm.
probably not in the rest of the teams, right?
Yeah. I think that's also, yeah, that just means that right now in the medium term, communicating to the team instead of what I said earlier about it being the team trying to have autonomy and trying to find the spaces for fun. We tell them to look out for spaces in which they can decrease stress and improve
Yeah,
productivity or
exactly.
redundancy of things. And that term will then change from when people are less stressed or have more time, will then say, okay, the new focus we want for you is on innovation and fun. Those are now our biggest
Yeah,
drive is towards that. And I think would be a pretty easy one to be able
yeah,
to
yeah,
explain. And maybe it would look like to show our concrete care in that, it would look like everyone getting um, one sprint point, a sprint to think about ways in which we could decrease stress. And maybe that's the wrong way to look at it is to add something in, knowing that if you say this to someone, they're going to be like, cool. And then,
more work.
yeah,
Well, so, with Sarush and Richard, I specifically had conversations about what's currently the priority, and until August, the priority is done over perfect. And then after August, which is the next big sort of project milestone we have, I've immediately put time in for them to clean up some of the processes and stuff they put in place so that when we go into the next project, hopefully some of those processes are more streamlined and we can do the same amount of work with less time or less stress. I think it's important for people to understand that I'm not trying to optimize productivity to get more done.
no,
I'm trying to optimize productivity to have more time,
yeah.
right?
Maybe that's the important part of the stress metric we're talking about to
Yeah.
explain is that this only benefits you. There isn't we're going to add more to your plate because of
Mm.
this, which is quite normal in other businesses. I was thinking on that, then again, going back to our talk feedback and the importance of that, it probably is just as simple as us talking to the team more about what decreases stress for you, what is causing you the most stress right now, and maybe having, instead of it just being the weekly enjoyment tracker, having a tiny bit more of a conversation right now,
Mm.
um, determining what is actually decreasing your stress or what is most stressful for you so that we can then quickly decide, okay, we have an ability to make a couple quick changes to help with stress right now.
Yep. Okay. Um, I mean, I think it helps me to explain these things or to put these things into words because it just makes it also clearer in my head. And it means
Mhm.
that I've got a forced time to think about these things, otherwise they happen in
Yeah.
between other tasks or outside of work when I have a bit of brain space and all of a sudden thoughts pop into my head. But yeah, it definitely helps me to crystallize some of this and then see more clearly also what the next steps would be, because even though it is clear to me, that I'm working towards this year and a half of when we will have time for this kind of stuff again. I hadn't really put into words, well, what does that mean for now? What does that mean? How should I verbalize that? And how could it, because the the implicit stuff that we haven't said, everything in between the words, is that it is quite likely that people, and especially the newer people in the business, they are listening to me and looking at me, and they're seeing, well, I'm under quite a lot of pressure, and this guy's trying to pile on more work. He's trying to make me more productive so he can do more stuff.
Mm.
And so making sure that it's clear to people why I'm highlighting the kind of stuff that I am, and why I'm creating more problems for them right now. Like, it sounds like I'm creating more problems for them, but I'm trying to do the opposite, right?
Often I'm just throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Mhm.
So it helps you be able to explain to me the things that I'm
Yeah.
missing. I'm thinking just off of what you said just now, if someone brings up an idea and instead of saying to them, we don't have time for that, like brushing it off as that's so lofty, maybe expressing to them, that sounds like a really good idea. Let's figure out a way of how we can make that possible to have time for that. And then that makes them understand that you see that as a good idea, or you do want to get to a level of time when they could make it. I'm thinking of how Saru's suggesting to make a game for our gaming time. And so if he expresses that idea, expressing back to him, that is a great idea. That's something that we would love and fully follows our principles. And we'd love to give you time to be able to do that. Let's figure out a way in which you can.
Yes. There's a very fine line there in terms of managing expectations, right? Because it's actually worse to say yes to everything and then them just piling up in a corner and ending up never happening anyway. That's like one of the biggest motivation sappers, is having a huge backlog of great ideas which you'd never get around to, because then people don't end up adding to the pile. In those cases, it's better to then just say, well, let's not put it on the pile because there's no room in the pile. But you also don't want to have a situation where people come to you with ideas and you're always saying no. So I think what's important to me, and we have a lot of these conversations, is that whether it's a good idea or not is not the only relevant factor. Is this the right time? Does the team have the capacity to deal with this stuff mentally right now? And so, yeah, it's a it's a very, very tricky balance. Like, I could go on for another half an hour just talking about that.
I agree that both can zap people bringing up ideas or looking for innovations or looking for things to improve. Looking at what I've seen in my, I guess, 9 months time, so I've done a full picture, is that I've seen that the innovation has already been zapped by the people who have already been here. And so when I see it from new people, I want to encourage it, because I'm sure that's what other people at the company were acting like a couple of years ago. And I think that you can manage expectations of, we really want to do this. We think this would be a great idea. I'd love to, in this case, I'd love to play this game, or we would love to do this. But also managing it and saying, we have to get to that point where you can. And we're not there right now. I think that will make sense to most people. And also allow them to have the autonomy of stopping themselves from bringing up more ideas, because they see the roadmap. They see that time frame. They see, hey, we haven't implemented my other idea yet. They explicitly told me that they're into it. So we're just waiting for that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a completely different topic, which is definitely worth discussing and interesting, but probably not something that we should start at the end of this conversation.
Yeah. It's been really helpful to actually think of the tangible ways that we are already aligning with what you've been talking about in these last PVTs. It's made it pretty explicit to me why we do some of the things we do. It's also made it easier for me to see, are those ways we're doing it actually giving us the results we're wanting? Is the enjoyment tracker giving us the information we want, or has it become redundant, or are we using it in the right way? That's really helpful for me to understand, because you don't know on the everyday tasks when you're filling out these custom fields which ones are important or which one aren't, or what they mean. So that's really helpful for me. And I found that in general, these conversations have really helped me to cement my understanding of the principles and why we're doing it. So I'd say they have been successful.
Cool.
The reasoning behind, I think, has been where I have been lacking before, and having that understanding kind of makes sense why it's so important to us at this company, because as you talked about before, we don't have many rules. We don't have many very rigid structures. And so if you don't understand the underlying reason why we're doing things, like to reduce stress, to promote fun, to promote creativity, I can get stuck in the nitty gritty of people being upset. But if it's towards that goal, I'm okay, I understand why we're doing this. And I also know what for myself to prioritize or not.
Cool. Then hopefully we'll be able to export at least part of this to the rest of the team, and that the following discussions will help us get closer to the final objective.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is a lot we can explain quite quickly to the team that can help them better align with that larger vision without having to have them sit through 4 hours of conversations.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Thank
And
you.
I'm excited for our next one.
Awesome. Me too.